So you're balloting 150,000 civil servants for strike action at the moment. What's driven civil servants to this?
Well, a decade of austerity, 10 years of pay not keeping right up with inflation. So civil servants are in real terms 20% worse off now than they were a decade ago. That's the equivalent of somebody doing a 5-day week going in 1 day a week for free. So it's already been difficult. But the real straw that broke the camel's back was the announcement of a 2% pay rise when inflation is between 10 and 13%. 91,000 jobs to be cut in 2.5 years. That's one job in every 5. At the same time, slashing our redundancy terms by 33%. So these are people at the bottom end of the pay scale standing to lose tens of thousands of pounds in redundancy settlements. So all of those things have meant that in a cost of living crisis, people have said we can't have that anymore, and that's why we're balloting for strike action.
So there's national disputes on the CWU and RMT at the moment. There's 100 ongoing ballots at Unite. There are ballots for action in the health service, in education as well. What should politicians learn from the scale of the anger we're seeing across so many different sectors of the economy at the moment?
Well, I think politicians have to learn something, but so do trade union leaders, would be my take. So I think what politicians have to learn is that this level of industrial action, and so in our case, we're having 214 ballots synchronized that we'll announce. That level of resistance across all sectors of the economy tell us that workers have had enough of paying the price for problems they don't create. This round of austerity we're being threatened with is made in Downing Street. This cost of living crisis is something that working people feel. You know, in my own union, I think 45,000 people in the civil service claim benefits because they're paid so low. 40,000 of them use food banks. And that's the same in the RMT, it's the same in the Royal Mail, it's the same for Unite in public and private sector. And frankly, people have had enough. And I think what I see is that people are inspired by seeing those who were first out of the blocks. So whether that was some of the Unite disputes waged over a long time that ultimately won huge pay settlements, or they see national disputes like the RMT, the Post, now lecturers in the UCU, people are inspired about fighting back. So I think politicians should learn we're not going to have it and we're determined to resist. What I think trade union leaders have to learn is that we have to recognise we need to win our individual disputes, but actually it is the government that is creating the conditions behind the scenes. They are stiffening the spines of BT and Royal Mail bosses to be more aggressive, same on the rail. And therefore what we have to learn, I think, is to join up the dots and recognise winning our own dispute is critical, but if those disputes are connected up, we have the potential, I think, to win so much more. And I think that is a lesson that many rank and file activists know. And I think more and more unions are also, I think, recognising, which is why I'm quite confident for the first time in years, we will see a wave of coordination, working together across both public and private sector. And I think that's where we can win.
Okay, well, we had sort of austerity Mark 1 12 years ago, and there was coordinated action by unions on pensions, strike involving millions of workers, and demonstration. I think in 2011, 500,000 people on the streets, which is bigger than any of the recent cost of living demonstrations. But that just seemed to fizzle out, and then austerity went ahead anyway. What's different this time?
Well, it's a really good question, and I think we do have to learn that lesson, something I speak about quite a lot. The coordinated action on pensions was incredible, but if we turn back and look at history, 4 unions started that off, my own, the UCU, and 2 teaching unions, the NUT and the ATL. Many people criticised that dispute when it took place first in the June, but it led to 29 unions and 2 million workers 4 months later. But the seeds were sown of the weakness of that on the day of the strike itself. One union, that I won't name, was quoted on the front page of The Guardian of saying, we've got to get today out of the way and get a settlement. And it's clear what was being indicated at the time was this is a protest. It is a one-off letting off some steam. And I think what we learned from that is that pensions dispute could have been successful had it been followed up and followed up quickly. And that's what the government weren't expecting. And sadly, we lived up to their expectations and it was called off. I think the difference now is that the disputes we see, whether it's the RMT or the Post, they're not about protest, they're not about one day, they are a serious programme of action. We've seen the CWU announce 9 days action of every member, haven't we? 18, 19 days in total. RMT have just announced a series of dates. In our ballot, we're pointing out that we're balloting for sustained, targeted action in the areas that were really hurt, rather than just one day protest strikes intermittently. And we're offering to coordinate those. So to give you an example, if the RMT are on strike, wouldn't that be a great day for our members in the Department for Transport to go on strike, so that when people can't use the rail, they use the roads? Well, if there aren't people in the safety vehicles on motorways or in the towers, there'll be disruption on the road. So it's about, I think, recognising we're in it to win it, to coin a phrase. It's not about protest, it's about winning. And I think, to me, that is the significant difference between where we are now and where we were 10 years ago.
The cost of living crisis has come off the back of the pandemic, which obviously was a sort of huge, unprecedented experience for people in this country. Do you think the pandemic has changed the mood among working people in this country, and that's why we're seeing this new wave of militancy?
Well, the pandemic certainly got a big effect, I think, and I think unions had to organise differently in the pandemic. I think so. We've learned quite a lot from the way we communicate with members, the use of technology, the fact that out of necessity in the pandemic, we'd have Zoom meetings. And what we've suddenly found is, rather than us getting on a train and doing a meeting of 20 people in a village hall at night, you can do a Zoom meeting and get 1,500 people on the call. So I actually think what the pandemic meant is many unions were able to communicate with their members better. So I think in many ways we're better prepared. But the pandemic also had the effect, I think, of making people understand their worth. You know, our members risked their lives to keep things running in this country. In the PCS's case, we had cleaners and security guards disproportionately dying because they were forced to go to work, often in private companies, because they didn't have sick pay. We had people running our transport system, our health service. And I think when you can see people who give so much in a time of crisis like the pandemic, now treated so badly. You know, one of our banners in PCS is first they clapped us, now they scrapped us. And I think it sums up beautifully that at the time politicians clapped and lauded people, now they cut their job and cut their pay. So I think the pandemic has had a number of effects, but it certainly is playing a part in, I think, how prepared we are now for what is, I think, one of the biggest battles that we've seen.
Okay, we also had, just before the pandemic, there was a 5-year period in which the Labour Party was much more left-wing than it's been for most of its history, and was promoting socialist ideas, and the leadership of the Labour Party were out on picket line supporting trade unions. Do you think that that changed the conversation politically in this country, and that that has contributed to the greater ambition of trade unions? And what's your feeling on where Labour is at now with its greater reluctance, shall we say, to stand up on picket lines and support trade unions directly?
Well, PCS is not an affiliated union, so I should make that clear. I'm personally a member of the Labour Party. I think the effect of the Corbyn period was that it gave trade unions and trade unionists a confidence to know that politicians would get up at the dispatch box and, in our case, for example, support our members on strike. We hadn't been used to that. You know, we were used to Labour leaders shuffling their feet, looking at the floor, being a bit embarrassed by strikes. Under Corbyn, the front bench were on picket lines, and you know, we had a big dispute in Bays on Victoria Street that went on for a long time, and every member of the shadow cabinet came to the picket line at one time or another, very supportive. And I think that was a boost, because often strikes don't get any political support in the way that they did in that period. Now we don't have that now, that's a fact. But I think in a way there's a self-confidence among some of these disputes that are actually saying we can do this for ourselves, we don't need other people to come and win this for us. You know, my position is clear that, you know, I want this government out. At the moment, it's only a Labour government that is going to replace it, and even if this Labour government isn't going to be as bold and exciting as I'd want, it's going to be better than what the Tories have. But I think the job of the unions now is to get on the front foot and then demand support. And so when Keir Starmer comes to the conference, the question the PCS will be asking him is, we're on strike for a 10% pay rise and to stop 91,000 job cuts. Do you agree that we should have an inflation-proof pay rise? There should be no job cuts. So we'll put that question to him. Let's see what he says. But what I know is what our members would like is an unequivocal, of course you don't deserve to have your income cut, and of course you shouldn't lose 91,000 jobs. Will we get that unequivocal answer? Well, we'll see tomorrow. So, you know, we've got to accept that politics has moved slightly, not in a direction that I would like, but I think a resurgent Labour movement, a resurgent trade union movement can turn the tide. And I think that's why we are not just supporting the disputes. We're supporting the People's Assembly demonstration in London on the 5th of November. We'll be supporting the big TUC lobby on the 2nd. And who was it? You know, events, dear boy, events. You know, the events we're seeing, I think, is a resurgent trade union movement, and I hope that we see that translated into a bit more radical politics.